In early summer 2012, Tim Mitson and I travelled to Ladakh in search of birds. We entered Ladakh from the west via Zojila Pass and drove towards Kargil. Within an hour, we reached the first settlement, with a large open area of green fields dotted with flowers. Here we encountered our first birds that are typical to western Ladakh. We drove by Dras, the coldest place in India, and visited the War Memorial Monument to 430 Indian soldiers that died during the battle on Tiger Hill in 1999. We reached Kargil in the afternoon and took a detour from the main road to Leh into Suru Valley. We drove for 30 kilometres to Langkurchi, where we stayed in Mala Guest House. We birded in Langkurchi in the afternoon and, the following morning, 10 kilometres up the road from Sangku. Suru Valley gets more rain than other parts of Ladakh, and the mountains have more grass cover. The valley is almost completely covered with agriculture, and we hardly found any natural habitat. Other than mountain chiffchaff, which was very common, we only saw birds that we'd encountered earlier in the day. Later in the morning we drove to Kargil, fuelled, and drove onwards to Runbeck, where the Muslim part of Ladakh ends and the Buddhist country starts. We drove on via Namikala Pass and Fatula Pass to Lama Yaru. Lama Yaru is an important monastery and a convenient place to stay, especially if you're starting from Srinagar. But we continued to drive for another hour down to the Indus River and followed it up until Rizong Monastery, where we stopped for the night. Rizong Monastery is on a side valley of the Indus River at the end of a 7-kilometre link road. It's possible to stay for free in very simple rooms. Dinner is served together with the monks. A donation is encouraged. On the hills around the monastery we saw the first blue sheep. This is the commonest of the 3 types of mountain sheep found in Ladakh. Birding was even more disappointing than Suru Valley. Except for chukar and black redstart that posed for my camera, we only saw mountain chiffchaff and great tit. From Rizong, we drove about 70 kilometres along the Indus River to Spituk, where the valley widens. From there, it's another 13 kilometres to Leh, the capital, and the only city in Ladakh. We found a room at Rainbow Guest House near Chonglamsa Road and stayed for 2 nights. I had a chance to wash and service the car, and we enjoyed good food and relaxed a little before continuing to Runbeck Valley. Leh is the place to organise trekking or expeditions to all destinations in Ladakh. In Leh we got our inner line passes through a travel agent. These are required for travel in eastern Ladakh. For those who want to take the more popular treks in Ladakh, it's not necessary to hire horses, carry camping equipment or food. All you need these days is a small backpack with warm clothes and your birding gear, because the local community has launched a homestay program. Villagers are trained to host tourists in their homes, and the result is that you can now stay in beautiful, clean local room and have 3 meals for 500 rupees. Unfortunately, I did not take the video camera on this trek, and you will have to rely on the photographs of Tim. We went on a 3 days trek to Runbeck Valley. We drove from Leh to Spituk, crossed the Indus River, and drove to Xinchan, where we parked the car and walked for 3 hours through a narrow gorge. Where the gorge ends, the upper valley begins. The valley here is wider and supports little agriculture. There's a little tea stall on the junction of 2 small rivers. The left one goes up to the 9 houses of Runbeck village at 3,700 meters, where we stayed the first night. In the afternoon, we birded the area towards Stock Pass, and on the following day, we traced back to the tea stall and went up the right river for 2 hours to Urutsi, our next homestay. Urutsi at 4,100 meters is a 1-house village. The house is a beautiful 3-floor building and looks like a little castle. Only one family lives in Urutsi, and it's the last village in the valley. In the morning, we walked up to Gandala Pass at 4,970 meters. On the far side of the pass is Marka Valley, and it is much recommended to continue and trek into this valley, which is the core of Hemis National Park. A little before the pass, we saw 2 male argali, the largest and rarest of the mountain sheep of India, with an estimated 250 animals only remaining. Before the clouds started to form, we returned back to Urutsi, collected our luggage, and went down in a few hours all the way to the car and then back to Leh. Next day we went to Hemis, 40 kilometers from Leh, to see the famous Hemis Festival. On the way we stopped in Shea Marshes, a birding area that has seen better days. Here, on a grassy flatland under Shea Monastery, I managed to film a few of the local birds on video. Ibisbil is the main attraction here and is found in the Indus River bed itself. The road between Leh and Hemis is the most populated area in Ladakh and has many typical houses and monasteries, with Shea, Tiksi and Matho being the most popular. At Karu we crossed the Indus and followed the road to Hemis. This village is the last stop on the popular 8-day Marka Valley trek. Its monastery is one of the biggest in Ladakh, and every year in early summer it holds a religious festival that attracts locals and tourists from India and all over the world. All other festivals in Ladakh take place in winter, as in summer people are busy in their fields. We had high hopes for eastern Ladakh after the rather disappointing Suru, Rizong and Runbeck valleys. Tang is one of the wildest and least accessible areas in Ladakh and is the home of the most sought-after birds. Early morning on the 1st of July, we drove from Leh to Pangong Lake via Chan La Pass, the third highest pass in the world at 5,300 meters. The pass is very popular with tourists who come to take photos in the snow and next to the pass marker. Tim took advantage of my filming break to take an early lunch. Descending down from Chang La Pass into Tang province, we passed by some unfortunate vehicles that had not completed the journey. These roads in the high passes of the Himalaya are not built to withstand the high pressure of ice and low temperature and fall apart very fast. We soon encountered our first nomads of the trip with their long-haired cattle and their traditional system of producing butter. Birding en route, we reached Pangong Lake for lunch. This lake, like others in Ladakh, is an important breeding ground for water birds, but the only bird found here and not in other lakes is the common merganser. The lake is very popular with tourists and there are plenty of campsites and restaurants on the shore, a feast for hill pigeons and brown-headed gulls. We camped in an open field a few kilometers north of the lake near a small stream, and I spent most of the afternoon filming local birds and animals. Next morning, we drove for about 30 kilometers along the lake until Spangmik, close to the Chinese border, and the last place where tourists are allowed. We stopped en route for breeding waterfowl, and then drove all the way back to Karoo, only 30 kilometers from Leh. There we fueled and filled up jerry cans with 40 extra litres of diesel, as there are no petrol pumps in Tang. We drove towards Manali to Rumtsi. We were lucky to find a homestay, and I was very happy to wash the car and myself, as the amount of dust inside was unbearable. Rumtsi is the last village in Ladakh before Tang La Pass, and although it's on the main road between Leh and Manali, it manages to keep its tranquility. Next morning we drove towards the pass. A few kilometers before it, Tim called me to stop, as he had spotted Tibetan snowcock. 2 birds above the road gave us a good view and enough time to film. Maybe our luck was about to change. Taglang Pass is the second highest motorable pass in the world at 5,360 metres, and a place one would be very likely to get altitude sickness if one came from Manali without first breaking the journey for a night in Lahore. A little later, after the pass, we met a group of road workers. These people are mostly from Bihar and West Bengal, states only 100 to 200 metres above sea level, and they must have difficulty getting used to work in such an altitude. A little further down the road we stopped again as Tim spotted our first herd of Tibetan wild ass. While watching these animals, a golden eagle took to the sky below us in the valley. As it was still early morning and the air was cold, I knew it would take him some time to get high and disappear, and I had enough time to zoom and focus the camera for a good shot. We drove down to Mori Plains and stopped for breakfast at a junction where the road to Manali meets the road to Soar. Here we found ourselves again in Chang, the wildest and most hostile part of Ladakh. With its strong winds and sparse rain, only nomads can make their home here. Here we left the main road to Manali, and 13 kilometres further on the valley of Soar at 4,650 metres opened with a view over a brackish lake. Here is the home of the Tibetan wild ass, Ladakh's version of the African zebra. The animals are curious and seem to like to race with cars. They run next to a speeding car and suddenly cut across it in front. The road follows the north side of the valley and reaches a marshy area. There I spotted the most important bird of the trip, a bird I had missed on my previous visit 10 years ago, the black-knecked crane. We drove a little further and reached the main village, Tukchi, with its monastery above it. These villages around Soar are inhabited by nomads who come and stay there in winter, so in summer they're mostly uninhabited. There are a few camps catering for tourists. We were offered tents without bathrooms at an exorbitant 2,000 rupees at one of these. So we arranged to use our own tents for free on the condition that we take our meals there. We camped there for 3 days. The food was basic, dal, rice, a few vegetables and chow mein, but the price was reasonable. After lunch we drove along the lake and found a family of black-necked cranes. I managed to film the parents with chicks. Tim was keen to find Hume's groundpecker. So, following information we were given, we headed the following morning to Startsapuk, a sweetwater lake in the south of the valley. On the way, not far from camp, we saw another group of black-necked cranes. Over the 3 days, we definitely saw 8 different individuals, and a guide we met later confirmed the presence of 10 cranes at Soar, with 3 breeding pairs. Filming in the early morning yielded better results, as the haze that affects the view later on the day had not yet started. We also saw 2 upland buzzards, one foraging on the ground not far from us. We managed to reach a ruined village on the south side of the lake, which is 10 kilometres from camp, and involved off-road driving. We parked the car, took out our camping chairs, cameras and scopes, and scanned the lake for waterfowl. From a distance, we identified another black-necked crane that was being attacked by nesting common terns. The village was deserted, and many birds were feeding on the numerous flies in the marshy ground around the lake, and nesting in the lake itself, under stones and in the ruins. We found nests of plain-backed snowfinch, Hume's short-toed lark, and Hume's groundpecker, whose nest is very similar to the nest of a bee-eater. This was the only area in Ladakh that we found literally teeming with birds, while all around grazed Tibetan wild ass, or Chang as it's known locally. We drove back to camp for lunch, and in the evening we searched and found a family of little owls in the north part of the village, about 10 minutes' walk from camp. Next morning we drove further north to look for Tibetan sandgrouse, stopping and listening in different places. It wasn't long before we spotted 4 birds flying towards the lake, and shortly after a pair foraging nearby. A few minutes later we saw one walking over and sitting on its nest, plus a pair with 2 chicks. We packed our tents after breakfast and drove towards Somoriri, through Polo Konga Pass. In Puga, we turned right and drove towards Upper Sundo. Shortly afterwards, the riverbed we were following began to be covered with Karagana plants, ideal habitat for many birds, and the further we drove, the denser the vegetation. We saw a herd of blue sheep grazing on the side of the road. A little before the village, we noticed activity in the riverbed. Plenty of birds were foraging together with marmots and pika. We stopped, and it wasn't long before Tim spotted Tibetan partridge. We had a reasonable view, but after our successes of the past few days with filming birds at close distance, we were hoping for video shots. We were disappointed in this as the partridge did not show itself again, but waiting there we were rewarded with white-tailed ruby-throat. We drove on via Nam Shangla Pass and Tsazang Tso Lake to Tsomoriri. On the way, we stopped to fill the tank with the diesel we brought in jerry cans from Karoo. We filmed some nomads with their pashmina goats and their long-haired cattle, the Zomo, which is a mixture of cow and yak. We saw ravens feeding on a carcass and a lammergeier in the air. The only place we had to show our inner line permit was in a police outpost before Korzuk, the little settlement on the west side of the lake. We camped in Korzuk for the night and were happy to leave early in the morning, as it is not a nice place, and the only birds we saw there were families of bar-headed geese. The marshland on the north part of the lake, that was teeming with waterfowl 10 years ago, has now disappeared due to overgrazing, though as usual it's blamed on tourism. I still had to catch up with some common birds for my video, and Upper Sundo was an excellent place. We ordered lunch in the small tea stall in the village, and while waiting I was filming the local people. Upper Sundo would be a great place for birdwatchers to stay, and we were informed that a homestay is in a stage of being built. While I was filming robin accenta, Tim found Tibetan partridge standing under a caragana plant. The bird stayed long enough for me to come over with my camera, and ignoring us, started foraging. After a few minutes, it had clearly had enough of us and ran towards us to chase us away. We camped again in the same campsite at Soar, and in the morning started our drive towards Manali. After Mori Plains, we stopped in a place catering for travellers for breakfast, and there I had a chance to film some foraging yellow-billed chough, hill pigeon and great rosefinch from a short distance. Hoping to reach Manali early in the evening without stopping overnight in Keylong, as most travellers do, we drove on up to La Pass and down to Sarchu, the border between Ladakh and Himachal Pradesh, where we had to show our passports and register. Later, we drove by Baralachala and Lahul Valley to Rohtang Pass, from where you can see the green Kulu Valley. We were dreaming of pizza and cold beer in Johnson Bar in Manali. However, this was not to be, as an avalanche on the far side of Rohtang Pass had blocked the road. We had to camp for another night, and I was rewarded with this beautiful video shot of royal pika.